People don't like to hear this, but wealth, or the lack of it, is very often a reflection of character long before it is a reflection of opportunity. And that's deeply unsettling because it removes the comforting fantasy that someone else is responsible for the chaos in your life. If you are perpetually broke, anxious about money, drowning in debt, and secretly resentful of those who are doing better than you, it's extraordinarily tempting to blame the system, the economy, your parents, your government, or sheer bad luck. But the brutal truth, and this is where it hurts, is that undisciplined men manufacture financial hell for themselves in exactly the same way they manufacture psychological hell through avoidance, short-term gratification, and a refusal to adopt responsibility for their own actions. Money is not merely a tool of exchange. It is a representation of value, time, trust, and delayed gratification. When you spend impulsively, avoid budgeting, lie to yourself about your habits, or refuse to learn how money actually works, you are not making neutral decisions. You are practicing a form of moral negligence. You are training yourself to sacrifice your future self for the comfort of the present moment. And life, being the ruthless accounting system that it is, eventually sends you the bill with interest. What's particularly dangerous is that financial disorder rarely arrives as a dramatic collapse at first. It creeps in quietly, disguised at convenience as "I deserve this," as "I'll fix it later," until one day later arrives and you discover that your freedom has been traded away for things you barely remember buying. And then something even darker happens. Resentment sets in. You begin to believe the world is unfair, that success is reserved for the corrupt or the lucky, and that responsibility is a trick used to keep you down. But that belief is poison, because it strips you of agency, and without agency, improvement becomes impossible. The disciplined individual understands something fundamental that the undisciplined refuse to accept. Order precedes freedom. You do not become wealthy by wishing for abundance. You become wealthy by telling the truth about your situation, by confronting your financial incompetence without flinching, and by voluntarily imposing structure on your behavior when no one is watching. That means tracking what you spend, not because it's fun, but because reality demands to be acknowledged. It means living below your means, not because you enjoy deprivation, but because self-respect requires that you don't mortgage your future for momentary pleasure. And perhaps most importantly, it means abandoning the childish fantasy that motivation will save you. Motivation is fleeting. Discipline is reliable. Responsibility is transformative. When a man truly decides that he will no longer lie to himself about money, that he will no longer outsource blame, and that he will bear the weight of his own financial decisions, something remarkable happens. Chaos recedes. Anxiety diminishes. The future becomes negotiable rather than terrifying. Wealth, in that sense, is not the primary reward. Competence is. And competence compounds financially and psychologically in exactly the same way interest does, slowly at first, then all at once. One of the most insidious aspects of financial irresponsibility is that it mirrors a deeper psychological irresponsibility, and understanding this connection is crucial if you want to escape the cycle that traps so many men. The failure to manage money is rarely just about numbers on a screen. It is a failure to understand the relationship between your choices and the consequences that inevitably follow. Humans are notoriously bad at delaying gratification, yet the very nature of financial success depends almost entirely on the capacity to sacrifice the present for the sake of the future. Investing in your future self is not a philosophical luxury, it is a moral obligation to the person you will become, the person who will inherit the consequences of your current negligence. Debt, impulsive spending, reckless consumption, and the endless chase of superficial status symbols are all manifestations of a deeper psychological disorder, of a refusal to confront reality as it is, rather than as you wish it would be. Men who do not master their finances are men who do not master themselves, and this has repercussions far beyond money. Your financial behavior spills into your relationships, your health, your career, and even the stability of your emotions. The undisciplined individual reacts to life like a leaf in a storm, buffeted by every external force, blaming others for the chaos that they themselves have nurtured. In contrast, the disciplined man understands that while he cannot control everything, he can control something, namely, his choices. And from the domain of choices comes a kind of sacred authority over life itself. He structures his day, allocates his resources with intention, and treats money not as a mere token, but as a representation of time, effort, and moral responsibility. Compounding this with the psychological truth that small, repeated acts of order build a resilient character, financial discipline becomes not a chore but a declaration. I am someone who can face reality, bear the consequences, and navigate life with integrity. Wealth, therefore, is a byproduct. But the transformation that occurs internally, the sense of self-efficacy, the clarity of thought, The capacity to delay gratification is the true reward. And make no mistake, the world notices. Competence generates opportunity. Reliability attracts trust. And trust generates the kind of leverage that money alone cannot buy. The cycle is simple in principle, though extraordinarily challenging in execution. Take responsibility, impose order, cultivate competence, and allow wealth, both internal and external, to grow naturally as a consequence. It is worth emphasizing, and this cannot be overstated, that the journey toward financial mastery is also a journey toward moral and psychological maturity, because the principles that govern money are the same principles that govern life. Consider, for a moment, the chaos of a man who is perpetually late on bills, who borrows recklessly, who treats his credit as an extension of his self-worth rather than as a tool. That chaos is not simply external. It is a reflection of a fragmented mind, a mind that refuses to confront discomfort, a mind that seeks solace in avoidance rather than courage. Financial disorder teaches harsh lessons often too late. Anxiety becomes a constant companion. Stress infiltrates relationships, and opportunities slip through fingers that are unwilling to plan, save, or take prudent risks. Yet, there is hope. Because these patterns are learned, they can also be unlearned. The first step, as uncomfortable as it is brutal honesty. Look at your finances and tell yourself the unvarnished truth. This is where I am. These are my mistakes. This is the reality I created. There is no room for excuses, no room for self-deception. And once that truth is fully embraced, the second step emerges naturally: structure. You begin to set rules, not because life is inherently fair, but because structure creates stability in a world that is otherwise indifferent to your suffering. You learn to budget not as an act of restriction, but as an act of empowerment. You learn to save not as an act of fear, but as an affirmation of your ability to plan and to honor the future self who deserves security. You learn to invest not as a gamble, but as a deliberate exercise in delayed gratification, patience, and calculated risk. In this sense, financial discipline is a kind of moral training, a rigorous test of character that separates men who are capable of self-governance from those who remain in perpetual chaos. And paradoxically, the discipline itself, though often resisted at first, becomes a source of freedom. By voluntarily submitting to order, by bearing the burden of responsibility when it is uncomfortable, you cultivate resilience, self-respect, and a profound sense of agency. You come to understand, in the deepest sense, that freedom is not the absence of constraint, but the mastery of self. And mastery of self is the foundation of lasting wealth, because a man who can command his mind and his habits is a man who can command his destiny. Now, it is crucial to understand that financial competence is not merely a private virtue. It is a social signal. A declaration that you are reliable, trustworthy, and capable of bearing responsibility in a complex world. Humans, as social creatures, are acutely attuned to the behaviors of those around them. And one of the clearest markers of competence, and therefore potential leadership, is the way a person manages resources, including money. Men who are careless with their finances often find that opportunities, promotions, partnerships, investments, and even social trust evade them. Not because the world is inherently cruel, but because chaos begets chaos. Conversely, men who impose order, who track their expenses, who honor commitments, who plan and save, not only cultivate personal stability but also attract allies, collaborators, and opportunities that the undisciplined could scarcely imagine. This is why financial mastery is inseparable from character development. The habits that make you wealthy also make you reliable, and reliability is the currency of trust in every domain of life. It is worth noting, however, that this process is never instantaneous. There is no quick fix, no formula that will instantly transform poor judgment into financial acumen. Rather, it is the accumulation of small, deliberate actions over time: paying bills on schedule, resisting impulsive purchases, tracking income, investing prudently, and taking responsibility for mistakes that compounds, like interest, into meaningful competence. And the psychological payoff is enormous. With each act of discipline, anxiety diminishes, confidence grows, and the ability to think strategically about the future expands. It is also deeply humbling, because you realize that wealth is not a reward for cleverness alone. It is a reward for sustained moral and psychological effort. You cannot cheat the system, not in any meaningful, enduring way, because life's accounting is precise and unforgiving. The moment you attempt to escape responsibility, reality will reassert itself, often painfully. Therefore, financial mastery is inseparable from self-mastery. The person who cannot regulate impulses, who cannot confront discomfort, who refuses to bear the weight of their own decisions, will remain trapped in a cycle of scarcity and regret. Conversely, the person who cultivates self-discipline, who voluntarily accepts the burden of responsibility, who acts with honesty and foresight, begins to experience a profound transformation, not only in their financial standing, but in the way they navigate every domain of life, from relationships to career to personal growth. Mastery, then, is not merely about money. It is about the ability to confront chaos, to impose order, and to extend that order outward into a world that will never pause to accommodate weakness. Finally, what I want to impress upon you, and it cannot be overstated, is that the pursuit of financial competence is ultimately a pursuit of freedom, but not the kind of freedom that is thoughtless, reckless, or unmoored. True freedom emerges only when you have voluntarily submitted to order, when you have disciplined yourself to navigate the inevitable hardships of life rather than fleeing from them, and when you have learned to structure your decisions so that they serve not merely your impulses, but your higher aims. A man who avoids responsibility, who spends recklessly, who lies to himself about his financial reality, is enslaved not by an external force, but by his own weakness and lack of foresight. Conversely, a man who takes ownership of his financial life, who tracks his spending, invests wisely, saves deliberately, and acts with prudence even when it is uncomfortable, is free in a profound sense, free to make choices, free to take risks, free to pursue meaningful goals without the constant shadow of anxiety. This kind of freedom, paradoxically, comes only through constraint. It comes through the daily, often mundane acts of discipline that accumulate into competence. And here is the most important psychological insight. Competence begets confidence, and confidence compounds in exactly the same way as money compounds. When you know that you can rely on yourself, that your decisions are informed, deliberate, and consistent, you approach life differently. You are willing to take calculated risks, to confront challenges, to engage with complexity, because you understand that failure is a lesson, not a catastrophe, and that preparation, not luck, is the currency of lasting success. Wealth, in this sense, is a byproduct, a reflection of inner order. But the transformation, the profound, enduring transformation occurs inside. You develop patience, foresight, self-respect, and the capacity to endure discomfort for the sake of long-term reward. And this is why undisciplined men are not merely poor, they are impoverished in spirit, in confidence, and in possibility. Conversely, the disciplined man, by taking responsibility for his financial life, demonstrates a mastery that radiates into every domain, relationships, career, health, and the very manner in which he confronts reality itself. Money is not magic. It is not luck. It is the mirror of your character. And when you master it, you are mastering yourself, one deliberate choice at a time. That is the lesson few men are willing to face, yet it is the lesson that underpins not just wealth, but a life of meaning, competence, and genuine freedom.